Welcome to today's Abacus Law Free Training Thursday. Today we'll be taking you through quick and easy time tracking. As always, if you have any questions, please put them in the sidebar, and if we have time, we will get to them at the end. Our trainer today will be Ben Fu, and he will be taking you through this presentation. Ben, Fu?
Thank you, Amanda. Welcome, everyone. As Amanda said, we're going to go over quick and easy. So, quick and easy time tracking. Pretty much what's going to cover is how to obviously enter your time through notes. If you don't know how to do that, we're going to make sure we take you step by step on how to do that. But I'm also going to show you some quick tools with regards to time tracking purposes to actually monitor the time that you've already entered. Okay, so with that said, I'm going to start you off with the entering of time through our notes. So when you are within any one of your matters, obviously you're clicking on the matters icon here, and then you're going to go into, let's say, any given one of the matters or cases that you might have. When you go in through the notes tab, you'll be able to then, in the notes tab in this section, you'll be able to go through and then of course add any particular notes. So as you can see, the whole purpose here is when it comes to not only taking a look at all of your information with regards to your case or matter, everything here is matter centric, right? You have your injury, which is your injury tab in this case will be in relation to the general type of a case, right? Your notes, your link names, events, and documents and emails. So it's a lot easier to be within the case already and then simply just go into your notes tab to then add your time. So we can turn a note into a time ticket. That same concept goes and bodes for all of our other records, which will be your events, your documents, and your emails. If you see in any one of these records, and you'll see that there's a dollar sign, right? If there's a dollar sign, a column, I should say, and then the dollar sign is next to any given event, any given document, or any given email, that's a good way of keeping track of your time. In other words, you can turn any one of those records into a time ticket. For purposes of today's demonstration, what we're going to go over is your notes and turning a note into a time ticket, which is obviously the most commonly used method by most of our firms that are our clients. Okay, so you go into your notes, then you're going to go into the add button here at the bottom. And when you click on the add button, you're going to see a note editor pop up. Now, the note editor, as I like to say, you can keep track of what we call real time, which will give you today's date as the current date. And then you can hit the play button so that you can track incoming calls and outgoing calls, right? And be more accurate when it comes to that. Or you could obviously backpedal into any given day of the calendar. And let's say you wanted to go back into, last week, or sorry, the Monday, because you obviously haven't had time to enter in your notes. You can always go into that date, right? And then enter the time as you please, or at your discretion, put in the amount of time that it took you to enter that particular note. Okay. Just so you know, as far as keeping track and the accurate amount when you hit the play button, whatever it ends up, let's say it ends up in 1 hour and 33 minutes. When you turn that note into an actual time ticket, the Abacus will know to round it up to 1.4 hours, right? In the example I just gave you. But at your discretion, you can always change that and make it 1.3 if you wanted to. But by default, if you set your default settings on the increments of how you want it to round to the nearest tenth of an hour in this case, you can have that preset. If you don't have it where it rounds to the nearest of the 10th hour, it'll just leave the actual amount there as it was. Okay, so 1.33 will simply be 1.33. All right, let's go in and quickly just show you for today's date that I'm going to enter one in, right? And let's say that I know that I have worked on this and it's going to be 1.5 hours. So you put in the 1.5 hours. If you are within your notes and if you're within your case or matter, notice how your name and your matters are already filled out for you. So that's why I like doing it from the notes tab within the case or matters. That way I don't have to search to make sure that the note that I'm adding, that I am linking it to a particular name or matter. It already knows by default that that's what I want, and that's what's already set in for me. When it comes to the actual note type, the note type is for strictly Abacus Law or case or management productivity reports, not necessarily anything that will show up on the actual invoice. So when you hit the lookup arrow here, you can have as many valid note types as you like, but again, it's just for productivity reports within Abacus Law. Let's say I wanted review, for example, as one of my notes. As I type it in, I already have one in place. Any given list that's within these note types, you can create yourself. Okay, that's why there's an add, edit, delete. So the list is obviously up to the firm's discretion as to why you would want to have that list, obviously to fit your firm's needs. Not necessarily, you have to have all these other ones that I have. You can always get rid of them and trim that possible list down to what you would prefer. So that would be your note types. And again, it doesn't show up on the invoice. It's just for productivity reports. When it comes to the initials, the buy, here automatically, if you're yourself a timekeeper, you'll be entering your own um, narrative here within the yellow box, and your buy, your initials in the buy field here will be set in place. Okay, this is going to be the initials that are going to show up next to the invoice. They're going to show up on the invoice next to the actual narrative or the work being done for that particular client. So it's obviously imperative that you have the correct initials here. Not only that, but these initials are what's going to dictate the timekeeper's rate. So that's what's going to be valued at. So if by any chance every given attorney is entering their own time, then that's fantastic. They can lift their initials. However, if an attorney needs assistance by their secretary or staff members to enter the time for them, the legal assistant, the secretary, or any one of their staff can enter their time, but they just have to make sure that they're entering their own the attorney's initials here, so that it can obviously create the right rate and amount will be billed in the invoice. Okay, so keep that in mind. So yes, you can assist your attorneys in entering their time if they so desired for you to help them out. So when it comes to the actual narrative, you're going to come in here into this yellow box, and then you're going to start typing up whatever um, the description would be. Review agreement, if you wanted that. Now, within this narrative also is something that we called the text macros. And I don't know if you've used text macros before, but think of text macros as abbreviations that can be fully automated into descriptions. Okay, so think, let's say, for example, TCW. I've created these text macros before, so it's just a matter of now, after I've created them and within my user preferences, making sure that I have a box check in the settings that says expand text macros with a space bar. Well, that simply means that if I set up my text macro and I hit the space bar, it'll automatically then um, expand my abbreviation into a full description like it just did. So these particular descriptions, you can have as many of them as you like set up. That was one of them. And then another one would be, let's say, review, analyze. So I have RA already. If I hit the space bar, it already see how all these text macros come into play. I have another one called PT, so called Project Tiger. And that's how they can all come into full demonstration here. Now, to actually set up these text macros, how do I go about doing that? Well, simply put, all you got to do is be within the yellow box and check, or I should say, click on your F5 function on your keyboard. At the top, there's going to be escape, F1, F2, F3, F4, the F5. When I click on F5, you can then see how a pop-up window comes up called the text macro maintenance window. In here is where you would have a blank canvas. In other words, there will not be any of these text macros created. It will be empty if you haven't used it or yet. And then you're going to proceed to, using or adding any text macros that you want. As examples, just want to show you, let's say within, any given firm, some folks likes to use, let's say, TCW for telephone conference with. There might be another attorney that doesn't like to use TCW and they're used to using TC for telephone conference, or maybe T/C for telephone conference as well. Well, you can create as many of these as long as obviously you're not using the same abbreviation and then having different descriptions. For example, I cannot use TC again and have telephone call because it'll revert to the original. So you can set it up, but I'll tell you right now, you won't get the actual description that you want because one has already been set. Okay. You can set up what we call temporary text macros because at any given time you can delete them as well. So keep that in the back of your mind when you're creating all these text macros. So how easy is it to create one? Just simply click on add, and I'm going to go and then to the extent of just saying very easy. So VE, right? That would be my text macro. I can then say the actual description and type it up. When I type up my description, then as easily as that, I've just added another text macro, VE, which is very easy as of right now. When I click on done and I ever want to put the abbreviations VE, then it'll know again with the space bar that it'll then translate over into that full description. At any given time after you're done, let's say you had temporary macros, text macros that you created and you want to get rid of them because you maybe want to use those same abbreviations later down the line, but with a different context, you can always go back, right, to your F5 within the yellow box and then get rid of them. So you can highlight it and then you can simply hit delete. And just like that, it's going to ask you if you want to delete it. I'm going to say yes. When I'm done, now it knows that when I type VE, obviously that won't be there anymore. See that? So those are the text macros. And I just wanted to show you that because a lot of folks like using this method as part of their easy way of just typing maybe more generic descriptions that they're used to writing and making you simply put in any abbreviation they want. And then it'll obviously put the entire, narrative in there. So create those text macros, obviously at your leisure and as your firm needs them. Okay. The other concept that I wanted to explain within my note editors is that a lot of the times you're not ready to finalize the entry. So let's say I worked on this, right? And I know that I'm going to go home and I'm going to do a little bit more work. So it's always, I like to preach that it's always best that you save it as a note first, right? Prior to actually finalizing the entry. Some firms call it posting the entry, creating time tickets, right? Regardless, you're not ready. So while you're not ready, how can I save this and come back to it later on, as opposed to having two entries on the same day? Okay, so let's say I'm going to go home and I'm going to work some more on drafting the document, right, regarding the same topic. So I'm going to save it for now here. I'm going to come back the next day. And when I come back the next day, then I'll be able to then double click on it, get in the actual narrative again, and then continue on drafting, putting in the narrative that I should have added to that particular day as a narrative, as a task. So DD, drafted document regarding same. And just like that, right? Now you can see that I've added that. Well, clearly my hours should go up because I didn't post the time. I didn't finalize the entry. So I can easily move this up, right? And probably spend another half an hour on this. So let's say now that is up to 2 hours. Now I'm ready to create that time ticket. Now I'm ready to finalize that entry. So all I got to do really is hit my bill here. Bill means it's going to create a time ticket. And when I create a time ticket, it simply means that this particular note that now has been turned into a time ticket is going to be moved into billing and accounting. But before I even do that, let me show you another trick. The other trick is the three asterisks. Anything you type after the three asterisks will not be reflected on the invoice, but rather stay within your Abacus Law here. So if you ever wanted to add an extra note to the actual narrative that's going to be reflected on the invoice, you could do it after the three asterisks. For example, do not show on bill. So this simple information, which is an extra note related with the actual narrative that's going to be on the actual invoice, anything prior to the three asterisks reflects on the invoice. Anything after that stays within your notes here in Abacus Law. So let me show you what happens when I hit bill. See, when I hit bill, are you going to have this sent to accounting? Are you sure you want to build this note record? You're going to get this pop up every single time you're trying to create a time ticket. If you want to get rid of this, you can bypass this under your user preferences, just so you know. So it will be called a setting called bypass confirmation pop-up window. So in this case of yes, thank you for letting me know. I do want to create a time ticket, so I'm going to hit yes on that. When I click yes, then I get my time ticket that shows up. Notice that after my three asterisks, the phrase that I put in of do not show this on the bill does not reflect. Think of whatever's on this yellow box, it was actually going to be reflected on the invoice itself. Okay, and think about it on a grand scheme of thing, right? If you're a firm and you simply want to make sure that your attorney does less editing when they're giving the pre-bills for review, think about making that sure that this entry that you're entering here, or this time ticket that you're finalizing, is as accurate as possible so that your attorney has less to review, right? And therefore your billing person has less to do as well. If you put a generic type of an entry in here, that means that when it comes to reviewing it, they might want to add more to the verbiage in this section, or edit it as is, right? Or do a little bit more editing. So, obviously, as the train of thought, this should be your final as to how the client would actually pay for it. So keep that in mind, because it's less work for everyone at the end of the day. Your time tickets, obviously, in this case, is to say it's a billable time ticket, but we do have other types of time tickets. You have flat charge, okay? You have no charge. Think of no charge as in, yes, you do reflect the information, but it will say no charge next to the actual narrative in the invoice. And then, of course, non-billable, meaning, let's say you do any pro bono work or any, for the most part, there are times that you want to enter your time, so you're keeping track of it. Anything time you create a time ticket and you still want to keep track of time that's been worked on but not necessarily is billable, you can check on the non-billable section here. Then, of course, you have your rate that you can take a look at, and of course, that would be multiplied times your billable hours, and that will give you your value of $1,000. So when I click done here, what's going to happen is there's always a spell check in place. So everything apparently I spell checked everything right. When you hit OK, now that's going to have a $sign right next to my note. Again, the meaning of the $sign next to the note is that it's now eligible to be billed. In other words, that note is eligible to be billed. That means a time ticket was created and it's been moved over into billing and accounting. Okay, so it doesn't mean that it was already billed to the clients. I want to make that very clear. Just because it has a $sign, it doesn't mean that it was already billed. No, you will determine that in billing and accounting, whether it's been billed or it still remains unbilled. Of course, those that do not have a $sign altogether simply means that your intentions are that as of yet, you are not billing those notes. Obviously, you're not putting it in an invoice. It's just notes simply within your Abacus Law, your case or practice management side of Abacus. Okay? Fantastic. So that's the concept of how easy it would be to enter your time. By that same token, if I now wanted to show you, okay, well, how do I monitor some of my time? Some law firms require for you to keep track of your own time. They might say, well, you need to work a minimum of, let's say, 5 hours a day, or you need to keep track of time of 5 hours a day. In other words, whether it's billable, non-billable, flat charge, no charge. So there's going to be one little icon here in the bottom right-hand corner. It's called the Timekeeper's Hours Quick View. Okay, if I click on it, it'll give me a breakdown of today's time, right, of what I've done for the day, for the week, for the last week, current month, last month, and year to date. Now, I know it says hours billed, but really think of this as actual time tickets created. Because like I said, the time tickets that you create can either be non-billable, flat charge, no charge, and billable themselves. So it's not really the amount of hours billed per se, but really the amount of hours that a time ticket was created for. Okay, so it's a good way of knowing, if you're going to keep track of this for yourself, right? Because it says activity for BD only for myself. I cannot keep track of my colleagues of what they're doing. But if I was supposed to put in a minimum amount of hours here, let's say 5 hours worth of work, right? I can see, well, I've only tracked down 2 so far. I still got my other 3 missing, so I should go into any one of my cases or matters and enter in my time. So it's a good way to monitor your own time. You can then see if you've entered time for the week, for the last week, for the month, how much time you've entered. And that might propel you to go back in and ensure that, well, how many of these I know that I've created time tickets for versus the ones that I haven't created a time ticket for. And let's say you knew that you were working on one particular case, it goes to show that you can go to that case or matter and see if you've already created time tickets for all of them, or if they have empty $signs right next to it. Okay, that's one way of doing it. So that's for yourself to keep track of yourself. Another quick way, let's say you're responsible for the staff for monitoring everyone's time or the attorney's time being entered into the system. And at any one point, you want to see how they're entering their time. Well, we have in the dashboard, which is going to be this little red icon at the bottom, or you can click on F3 on your keyboard, and that would then bring up that as well, which is the dashboard itself. There's going to be within your settings, if you have never used this, within your setting, there's going to be an add apps to this dashboard section. And if you go to the section of the accounting apps, see one says billable time or dollars, click on that. And once you do, it'll bring up this as an example. So pretty much what this does is it gives you a breakdown of all of your staff members of how many times they've entered into the system. Okay, you can have it show obviously by time, by billable hours. And this obviously says date range year to date. If you wanted to do, let's say last month, you can then see, well, there are only 2 people have entered time last month. So they're obviously, I know they're working on it. So what is really maybe the consensus? Well, maybe as someone that's tracking their time and monitoring their time, you might want to go and poke those individuals that should be entering their time if only 2 of them have been doing so. Okay, so you can always look by range, by this month. Clearly, nobody's entered time this month except for 1 individual. So you can keep track of these, a quick view of them saying, okay, how come you haven't entered your time? And then bother them as such. I want to say bother them, but that is their responsibility. Otherwise, you guys are not going to get paid, correct? So this is a way of doing it. As far as just keeping track of the rest of your team, the other one can be just for keeping track of yourself. Okay, one way. And you can even see the dollar signs here as well, as far as the amount of hours that they're, the dollar amount as opposed to just the hours that they've been billed before. Okay, that's all I had for you for today. Let me open up for questions now. So if you may, please ask your questions in the sidebar at the bottom where there's a section that's called questions, and you can type that in if you have any, and I'll be more than happy to answer any of your questions. Can you, so the question is, can you create a certain what code to automatically bill a certain activity code? Can you create a certain what code to automatically bill a certain activity code? If I'm interpreting that question correctly, um, the what code cannot automatically have a certain rate under an activity code, but what you can do is you can have certain activity codes created and they can have a specific rate in place. So if I go back to my billing module here, and this question was asked by Samantha. So if I go into my billing module, there are options to, instead of creating rates for individual timekeepers, you can create them for specific activity codes. So as long as hopefully it's waiting for this to open and I can show you what I'm referring to. But the what codes cannot be automatically, they cannot have activity codes. But the actual activity codes themselves would be under File, Setup, and there's activity codes here. Why don't you go into the activity codes? As you may or may not know, there are what we call task-based billing as a setup within our matter maintenance. And if you set anything up with task-based billing, that means that you can assign specific task codes and specific activity codes to any given case or matter. So then you can go in and have these activity codes be edited, and you can then go into the rate section and they can have their own rate levels. So you can have activity codes for that one for plan and prepare and have one rate already in place as to what the hourly rate would be for that activity code. And you can have it for draft and revise, review, analyze, communicate, and you would set up different types of activity codes with their own specific rates. I don't know if that answers your question, but that might be a workaround maybe as to how you want to maybe enter your time. Yes, we have already done that, but can we link those codes to a rule or anything? Um, no, you cannot link them to a rule. No, that is not a possibility. Or a certain entry into events that would then trigger that activity code in the billing. So no, the only thing that you can do, you can bill from an event. So if I go back here and I show you, and you have an event already in place, right? And you have that within your notes, you can always turn that particular event and turn it into a time ticket. So all you have to do is just highlight it. You would then hit bill. You says, are you sure you want to build this record? Then from there, you can actually build the particular event. So the information comes through here. Obviously, the narrative that shows up here is just regarding the what type of event it was or what code it was. But then here you would have to type in exactly what you want to be reflected on the invoice. And clearly, you got to make sure that you put a certain amount of billable hours. So, yes, you can create a time ticket from an event, but it's not going to be automated in here. If you are building in a certain activity code and it's, let's say, a task-based billing, then the task-based billing field would be available here, as well as your activity codes. Okay, thanks. I think the activity code sometimes shows this way. Yes, it will show in here, and then you can bill it at whatever rate that would be. Any other questions? Thank you, Samantha. Okay, we have 1 minute left, so if you are not able to have enter the question shortly, that means that we can wrap things up. But I'll give it another minute before Amanda is going to close us out. Okay, well, it looks like we don't have any other questions, so that's going to be it for today. Thank you all for attending and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Ben Fu. Have a great day.
Bye bye.